Welcome to Wines We Drink, a podcast for wine lovers and learners. I'm Charlotte Norsworthy, and together with my counterpart Keith Herndon, we'll be exploring a new wine each week. Keith is a lover of wine, and I am a learner of wine. We hope you'll learn and sip along with us too. Welcome back, everyone, to Wines We Drink, the podcast where each episode is an exploration of a wine varietal that features me, I'm Charlotte Norsworthy, and my co-host Keith Herndon, drinking an exceptional example. Keith, it's great to be with you for today's show.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. It's so much fun to be with you as well, and I just love talking about wine with you.
And tasting them.
And absolutely drinking them.
Yeah, and in this episode, our fourth episode, we introduce our first white wine as we explore and taste a Chardonnay. For those of you just now catching up with Wines We Drink, please listen to our previous episodes where we drink wonderful examples of Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noir. But today, it's on to the white category. Keith, why are we starting with Chardonnay?
Well, this varietal is a staple of many of the old world's classic regions, but especially France's Burgundy. A Chablis, for example, is 100% Chardonnay. And that's just a classic example of a Chardonnay wine that we tend to think of. When we think of Chardonnay, we think of a French Chablis, right? But this grape is used to make white wines in many different ways and in a wide range of styles. You'll find crisp and citrusy to those that have a heavy oaky flavor from the barreling, from the aging in barrels. You'll find some that finish with zest, and you'll have others that finish with maybe a soft vanilla. Right?
Wow. So it seems like Chardonnay is like the chameleon of the wine world. Is that right?
I think that's a great way to put it. My mentor, my wine mentor, Dr. Clinton Lee of the Asia Pacific Wine and Spirit Institute, where I've done some of my studying, he has described Chardonnay as the equivalent of vanilla ice cream because of its versatility. And it's certainly open to the skill of the winemaker that can take the Chardonnay grape and really craft whatever style on top of that grape that the winemaker wants to express. And I think that's why it's so exciting to have a really good example today.
For those wine novices among us, like me, that seems to make choosing Chardonnay a hit or miss proposition. So how do we know what to choose?
Well, it's very true that one Chardonnay can be very different from another Chardonnay. Okay, but I don't think that should frighten anyone away from the varietal, because I like to think that we can use that diversity to encourage more wine exploration. We've talked about that being the concept behind doing this podcast, be willing to explore. So the more variety of Chardonnays you sample, the more you're going to be able to understand their differences, those underlying nuances, the very discrepancy, if you will, of the flavor profile from one to the other. So that could be a classic Chablis, a crisp, unoaked example from Australia, right? Or one of the many, many different styles and expressions you're going to find in the California Chardonnays.
Well, let's get into it. The wine we're drinking today, what have you selected for us?
Well, as you know, many of the wines I've selected for us to share on this podcast come from places that I visited. Not all, but most. And this one is no exception to the visit category, right? We're drinking a Chardonnay today from Farniente, which produces wines as special and vibrant as the beautiful grounds that surround its winery. So this is in California's Napa Valley, which is, I would think, is kind of the U.S.'s wine garden, if you will. Maybe the people next door in Sonoma would argue with that, but I love the Napa wineries. And when you pass through the gates of Farniente, you're entering 13 acres that are a botanical garden wonderland, right? And so I'm very partial to that winery and to the thousands of southern azaleas covering the ground. Being a southerner and going out to California and seeing that setting, it's kind of like the Masters, right? With all those azaleas around there. So it's really a setting that clears the mind and puts you in the mood to relax and enjoy their wines.
Well, I'm sold. I wish we could be there. And I even see behind you a Farniente cutting board. So I'm definitely being transported here. And it sounds like a magical place. So which one of their potions are we going to drink today?
That's a great expression there. We're opening a bottle of the 2017 vintage from Farniente's Napa Valley estate. This vintage is the most popular of the recent Farniente Chardonnays among the Vivino app users. And yes, once again, the users of this tool have rated this wine among the top 1% of wines in the world. I like to think of it as a great window into this varietal. It's considered to be an iconic California Chardonnay.
Wow. And as I've mentioned before, and if you've listened to the previous episodes, we've been spoiled so far with all top 1% wines. And so I'm very excited for this one. Let's go ahead and pour a couple and get started.
Okay.
Right off the bat, as you're going to start this pour here, I'm noticing that unlike our two previous reds, you did not decant this wine before you've poured it. Can you explain a little bit as to why?
Yeah, I usually decant an aged red wine, but I don't usually with white wines, and sometimes that's just really a personal preference, in some ways. I think some experts will say that white wines, particularly ones that have been aged, will benefit from being decanted, but I like to say that I haven't really found white wines to be wound as tight as an aged red wine, and so I don't think they need as much unwinding.
Okay,
that's the way I would describe it.
Okay, I'm learning as we go, and I'm gonna pick up on that. Hopefully, interesting. Okay, great.
So, just take a look at the color of the wine, and how would you describe that?
Yeah, it's a beautiful light golden color, very translucent. And definitely not a deep gold. It's more of a yellow gold. But yeah, very clear and very faint.
Okay, so just swirl that a little bit and put it up to your nose and kind of see, what aromas are you might be picking up from there.
It smells very sharp. It sort of slices through my nostrils, if you will. Very clean. But it's also kind of woodsy. I don't know what a better word would be for that as of now in my wine vocabulary, my novice wine vocabulary. But yeah, I am getting a little bit of nature. Maybe I'm just thinking botanical gardens here, but it is also a nice sharp scent too.
Okay. Well, go ahead and take that first sip, and then I'll comment on some of the things that you picked up in the aromas.
Wow, that's delicious. Very, very easy going down the throat. Another bright, going off of what I was smelling, it's a very bright taste. Maybe a little acidic, if I had to describe it. If, I'm thinking about fruits, it's definitely more on the acidic side. Perhaps there's some citrus or something going on there. Maybe that's just from the style of wine. And then, yeah, going back to that nature, I wouldn't say floral. I would say, yeah, I guess woodsy would be the way, you described at the beginning. The barrels and the wine aging and soaking up some of that. Maybe that's what's happening here. I could be making that up.
No, you're picking up on all of the right things. Back to your aromas. I mean, when you look at the tasting notes, they refer to a sweet citrus, right? And you were talking about that. And then when you get into the actual some of the flavors, back in the middle of your palate, you were picking up on that lemon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it.
That sharpness that you were describing there, that's kind of the lemon that's coming out. And you mentioned this idea of kind of this earthy kind of thing, like that concept.
Yeah.
Well, the winemaker referred to the notes of flint.
Flint. Okay. There's there's the woods.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting. You picked up on that subtlety there. Now, and as a novice and still learning some wine words, you might not have chosen the word flint.
No,
right?
That wouldn't have come to
right?
mind.
But then you also notice the idea of some of the wood.
Yeah.
Right? And this was aged in oak, but not very long. Okay. It was only 10 months in oak.
And that's not a long time.
That's not a long time.
Okay.
Right? It's almost like they let the oak kiss the wine.
Okay. What would be considered a longer time frame?
Oh, much, 3 to 5 years or more. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
So there can be some barrel aging that takes a while, but in this particular case, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it did the winemaker's tasting notes refer to a sweetly toasted oak.
Oh wow. Okay.
Right.
Sweetly toasted.
Right. Now it was interesting. You described some kind of botanical, but you said not floral.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because the winemaker does say that you're going to find some white blossom floral notes in there.
Okay. Yeah. Right? Maybe it's fainter. I'm just remembering the florals from our reds, in the earlier episodes, and when that was my reference, those were much more at the top of my tongue, than these white blossoms maybe coming through.
So, the when I drink this wine, and the thing that I like about it, and not everybody has the same palate, not everybody picks up the same kind of flavors and notes. So it's not like a right or wrong answer for our listeners out there who are just getting into this understanding of, tasting and drinking wine and trying to describe it. But for me, I get a strong sense of melon flavor from this wine.
Interesting.
Right? I smell the melon in there, and then and to me, it's kind of a conflict almost on the palate between a honeydew melon and the lemon, and they're having a little bit of a tug of war on my tongue. Right? Interesting.
But both are very bright flavors, honeydew and lemon.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think overall, this is very bright and summery. It reminds me of something that you would drink. Well, maybe it's also, I'd love to ask you about maybe temperature here. It's chilled.
Oh, yes. You would definitely serve a Chardonnay chilled.
Well, and that I think reminds me more of summer. It's a nice, cool beverage, and one that has these sort of bright, easy lemon and melon notes.
Right. Well, I like the way that the winemaker finished off the tasting notes. The wine notes, the official wine notes from Farniente say, the finish is long and structured with citrus rind and mouth-watering acid.
Interesting.
And so
what a phrase.
But you noticed that acidity,
Yeah.
and you commented on the acidity.
Yeah.
But I like the way the winemaker described it as mouth-watering, because it is. It really sets you up, and you just want to keep drinking it.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely leaves you wanting more, and, to not be maybe gross here, but it does bring more saliva to the palate. It does sort of make your mouth water in the best of ways, and it brings you right back into another sip for that reason.
Yes, I think that this is a really good, almost an iconic version of a Chardonnay from Napa that is allowing the fruit to come out and allowing the fruit to be expressed without so overpowering from being in an oak barrel for too long. So sometimes with Chardonnays, you can get them overly oaked. Some people prefer that style when the Chardonnay has aged for a relatively lengthy period, but you don't get that here. As I mentioned, the winemaker's tasting notes refer only to a sweetly toasted oak, and I think that contributes to this wine's fantastic finish. Right? Mm-hmm. And it's where we get that real, as the notes refer to, that mouth-watering acid, right? But I really believe that this is an example where they let the zesty citrus effect come through. And I also want to add that one of the things that I think makes this wine approachable is its alcohol by volume of 14.3% makes it a bold wine, but it is not overpowering, right? And I think that lets the lemon citrus really shine, and to me, that's simply a delicious Chardonnay.
Oh, it's absolutely wonderfully refreshing, easy to drink. It definitely doesn't feel overpowering. It doesn't feel too much. It's very balanced. It feels just right.
So, I want to add that, a lot of the characteristics of this wine are inherent in the styles of wine that you get from Farniente as a winery, but also the location of the vineyards that they used for the grapes to produce this Chardonnay. They're located in Coombsville, which is a part of the Napa that's a little bit of a cooler growing region. And there's hills east of Napa, which protect those vineyards from the winds. And so when you're talking about this wine and you understand where the grapes came from, and you understand that it's kind of part of the Farniente style of wines, then you can really appreciate it. But I think we also have to really give a shout out to Nicole Marchese, who's the winemaker of this wine. She's a great example of the emerging women winemakers who are just making some awesome wines and breaking down the barriers in what has been a field long dominated by men.
Well, I love this wine that much more. This just gave me so many more bonus points. I love the fact that there are women sort of breaking into this space that, like you said, is primarily male-dominated. And it just brings, I think, maybe an interesting, a refreshing perspective. We describe the wine as refreshing, and, I think that also may describe Nicole. And I think that that's really, really incredible. And so once again, we've come to the time in our wine drinking where we tell our listeners what to expect in terms of cost. We're talking about an iconic Napa Valley Chardonnay, the top 1%. That's been ranked by the Vivino app as the top 1% in the world, that is. So this has got to be pretty expensive, right?
Well, I'm going to say it's not cheap, okay? But it's not an out-of-reach expensive wine, right? Again, I think this is going to fall into that pricing range that reflects a really excellent value. This 2017 is now listed on the Farniente website as part of its Cave collection, and it's listed on the website for about $80, right? You may be able to find it out in the supply chain anywhere from $65 to $85. So, not inexpensive, but not break the bank expensive. Right?
Maybe more of a special occasion wine for many of us.
I think, and that would be a very special occasion, right? This wine pairs so well with so many types of dishes, so it would be a great accompaniment at a variety of functions, right? It goes really well with poultry. It's a wine that really likes to be friends with some rich fish like a salmon or a tuna, and this one would hold up, I think, really nicely paired with pork and a wide range of vegetarian dishes. So I think this particular Farniente is incredibly versatile for matching with all kinds of food.
Well, that's great to have a wine that works with such a range of foods. I mentioned in the last few episodes how, again, maybe a little intimidating it feels to think about how a wine might pair with something. So it's good to know that you've got the vanilla ice cream of wines here to back you up. It's going to go with any toppings, right? So we're going to step away for a moment. We'll be back shortly to wrap up this episode for our wine word feature. This week's word is oak. And Keith will give us a take on why oak is an important wine word. We'll be right back. So we've talked in this episode about some of the oaky notes of the wine we drink today. So where does that come from, and why do we care about oak in terms of wine?
Well, in my understanding of wine history, okay, we can largely thank the Romans for the use of oak barrels in wine. So as the Roman Empire kept expanding, they were always looking for better ways to ship products to their far-flung outposts. And over time, they started using wooden barrels. I think they got that idea from some of the other people that they had conquered, right? And they started using these wooden barrels to transport wine, and oak barrels proved to be a really reliable vessel because they were watertight, right? But it was also over time that as they started consuming these wines that had been transported in these oak barrels, that they began to understand that the oak was imparting flavors and structure and complexity to the wines. And we still recognize those benefits today. So I think that, most of the oak aging today for both reds and whites occur in barrels that are made of oak from either French or American origin, right? Now, if you're really into wood, right, among our listeners out there, if you're really into wood, you can dig deeper in how these woods interact differently with the wine. There are some winemakers that prefer only French, and some winemakers that prefer barrels only from American oak. There are some that will blend, the two, right? But generally, winemakers choose the type of oak or blend of oak based on the flavors they want to impart in that final product. So this is not etched in stone, right? But generally, French oak is described as, imparting a lot of earthy characteristics and flavors like chocolate or coffee or savory spices, while American oak flavors are often described as coconut, vanilla, and sweeter spices, right? So let me give a shout out to the Kendall Jackson website for helping me formulate that type of definition, if you will, for some of these. But you can really see how oak plays out in the example of the wine that we drank today. It was not overly oaky, right? And so the Farniente Chardonnay that we drank, the 2017 vintage, was aged in oak, but only 100% French oak, and only for 10 months. So it was almost like the oak was just kissing the wine, and that's why we don't have this, overpowering oakiness, right, in whatever flavors that you would ascribe to it. But we use oak as part of the winemaking process now to give it some of that structure. We talked last episode about tannins, or one of the episodes about tannins, and oak has its own tannins. And so some of those tannins get placed into the wine, and that adds to the structure and the complexity of it.
Wow. Well, thank you for that explanation. It seems like we have a lot to thank for the Romans. The history part of that really speaks to the long traditions associated with wine and how the wines we drink today are influenced by the history that preceded us.
Exactly. I think that one of the reasons that I got really interested in wine was part of that history. There's such a tradition that goes into the winemaking process. But there's also winemakers out there that challenge those traditions and create really innovative wines as well. So it's these nuances that you learn to discover, by tasting and exploring lots and lots of different wines.
Great. Well, that will wrap up this episode. Another great example of the wines we drink. Thanks, Keith, and thanks to all of our listeners.
Yes, thanks, Charlotte.
Thanks for listening to Wines We Drink. Listen to our other episodes anywhere you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe so you'll be the first to listen to future episodes, and follow us on Twitter @WinesWeDrink and Instagram @TheWinesWeDrink. Cheers.